Hello and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura and today I am talking about The Silent Twins, which is a book written by Marjorie Wallace, originally published in 1986. However, there were other editions where she added on to it through the years. And then the movie just came out, The Silent Twins, directed by, I am trying to say her name right, but it is Agnieszka Smoksinska, and it came out this year, 2022, and it is still playing in theaters as of the time I'm recording this, and I would highly recommend it. It's not the perfect movie, but there was a lot to love, and it was a very powerful, poignant, emotional experience, and you should definitely go see this in theaters if you are able to. And before I get into the summary and the book versus movie, I will say there will be spoilers for both the book and the movie in this episode. But to get into the summary, so this is a true story about June and Jennifer Gibbons, who are two twins who form this codependent relationship. So at a young age, they start a game where they try to stay as still and silent as possible, and whichever one moves or speaks first loses. And this is something that just kind of escalates and snowballs into something bigger as time goes on, and it gets to the point where their teachers are worried, they're not just shy, they're worried that there's something wrong with them. So they tell the parents that the girls should be moved to a school for disabled kids. And while they're at the school, the teachers try to find different ways to get them to talk, but nothing is working, and they even have a surgery performed on their tongues because they think that maybe physically they're just not able to. However, the surgery doesn't help at all, and if anything, it just makes things worse for the girls. And the movie, by the way, leaves out the surgery. But eventually they just stop going to school and they stay in their room the majority of the time, and they are just very imaginative, and they create these elaborate stories using these dolls that they make. And as they get into their teen years, they start doing this written mail order class, a writing class, and then they write stories and novels and they submit them to different magazines and publications to try to be published. And then when they are 17, 18, they decide they want some romance in their life, and they are obsessed with American culture. And so there's this American family in town, and they kind of stalk two of the boys and will leave them messages and will constantly be calling their phone. They even break into the house at one point. And there's two brothers, and the older one kind of loses interest in them, but the younger one, who is more unstable, he will hang out with them, and they eventually both lose their virginity to him, but he's just a bad person, and he was abusive specifically to June, but both brothers just treated the girls poorly. And sorry, he was more abusive to Jennifer. But the American family ends up moving. In the movie, I don't know if it showed that they moved. They just kind of stopped seeing them, but the family moved, and after this they start hanging out with these other teenage boys who are even younger, who were also into, theft and different things. And then from there, June and Jennifer just start robbing places on their own, and then eventually setting fire to things and buildings. And eventually they are caught and arrested for arson and theft, although it wasn't anything arson is serious, but they didn't steal or hurt anybody or do anything too horrible, and yet they were sentenced to life in a mental institution. And then they meet Marjorie Wallace, who is a journalist, and she takes an interest in them, and she gets to know them through the years, and she reads their journal entries and their stories, and she ends up writing this book about them while they are still incarcerated. And they end up being released 11 years later, finally. But then when they are being released, on their way home, Jennifer ends up dying, and it seems like Jennifer sacrificed herself in a way in order to give June the opportunity to live a more normal life, which I didn't get into it here, but their codependent relationship, which caused them to be unable to live more normally. And so Jennifer knew this, and so her death, it seems like it was pretty mysterious, and they say it was something with her heart, but she also wasn't eating, and so it does seem like she wanted to die in order to help June. And so on to the book review. Like I said, this was originally published in 1986, and the edition I read had added chapters all the way up until 2008, giving updates on June. And I will say, one of the added chapters was a newspaper article that she had written, which was added in as if it was another chapter, but the article basically summarized the whole book. And so it was annoying that it was part of the book when it's I don't need to read a chapter that summarizes everything I just read, right? So I just kind of skimmed that chapter until it said something new and had updated information. And part of me was why was this book even published in 1986 when their story did not have an ending, so to speak? So I would have felt if I'd read it back then, I would have been okay, what was the point of this? However, I realized the point of it though was Marjorie Wallace was making a statement about how the twins were misdiagnosed and mistreated and they didn't get the help they needed. And so she was bringing awareness to the treatment of mental health and showing how these twins did not get the right help they needed and how they were given a far worse sentence than they should have. Like, they were sentenced to life, but they were in there for 11 years just for like some petty arson and thievery. But regardless, I am glad I read this now with all of the updates added to it, because Jennifer, she didn't even die until like the 90s. So when this book was originally published, they were both still alive and in, not jail, but in the mental institution. But also another problem I had with this book was I feel like Marjorie Wallace just wasn't the best at writing creative nonfiction. Like, she didn't write it in a way that really drew me in and that was like super compelling, and it just felt detached a lot of the times, even though she includes a lot of journal entries. So you should have felt like with those journal entries in particular that it really would have put us in the minds of June and Jennifer. And the journal entries definitely did help with that. But for the most part, I just felt like this could have been better written and in a way that really put us there with the twins. And there were parts that could have just been so powerful and emotional and poignant and touching. But again, I just felt more detached by the events because I think it just wasn't written the best. But the parts where we do read from their journal entries as well as the books they wrote, the short stories, June and Jennifer were amazing writers. So I wish this book would have been put together in a way that utilized their entries even more somehow, which she does use a lot of their entries, but I don't know. I just felt like this book wasn't put together the best and the pacing was kind of weird as well. And so I did find it interesting, but I feel like I could have been drawn in and captivated even more had it been written better. But speaking of June and Jennifer's own writings, June did publish a book called Pepsi Cola Addict, and we read segments from that. And that book sounds fascinating. I read that it is going to be republished next year, so I hope that's true because I would love to read that whole book. And on to the movie. So I said that the book, I just felt more detached and I wasn't as drawn in as I would have liked, and it wasn't as emotional as I would have liked. That is not the case with the movie. It is definitely very powerful, very emotional. And I saw this movie yesterday morning and I was going to film this video yesterday evening. But even in the evening, like, I just couldn't muster the energy to film because the movie was just so emotionally draining. So it was amazing, but definitely like an emotional experience. And they use stop motion animation to play out like their stories. And I thought that was a really cool way to show it. The puppets are like kind of creepy looking, and I think they're supposed to be creepy. So that kind of gave it a interesting vibe, but I did really enjoy those segments. And there is definitely a lot of whimsical, imaginative feel to this with like their fantasies and with their stories. And when we're in their imagination, it's so much more vibrant than when we're in their real life, where it tends to be more drab in color. And so I just really loved how that went back and forth. And then just a lot of beautiful moments too, showing their poetry and their music that I really loved, incorporating that. And then the two actresses, Tamara Lawrence plays Jennifer, Letitia Wright plays June. They were amazing. They were incredible in this. And if I'm being nitpicky, I would say that June and Jennifer were identical twins, whereas Lawrence and Wright do not look alike. And so I wish they would have had two actresses who looked like they could potentially be twins, or at least looked more similar, right? However, having said that, when it comes to them looking more similar or them having that chemistry, the chemistry and the bond they have is so important that we like feel that in the movie. And we definitely do. So I'd rather have that than have two actresses who look alike, but they don't have the chemistry, you know? So ultimately, I think it was good casting. I just wish they looked more similar. But anyway, they were incredible in this movie. And they talk in like this tight way, and it's never explained why. I thought maybe it was from the surgery they had, but the movie never addresses the surgery. And so, yeah, it's never explained. And I didn't mind it. There were just times where I wish there were subtitles because it was hard to understand at certain moments. And then to get into this love-hate relationship they have, I'm going to start with reading an excerpt from the book, which reads, June and Jennifer emerge through these diaries as two human beings who love and hate each other with such intensity that they can neither live apart nor together. Like twin stars, they are caught in the gravitational field between them, doomed to spin around each other forever. If they come too close or drift apart, both are destroyed. So the girls devised games and strategies and rules to maintain this equilibrium. And yeah, I said how their silence and their slow movement started out as like a game. And the movie shows this too right at the start, where they're in front of the tape recorder and the mom comes in and they stay still. And when the mom leaves, you know, one says to the other, like, I saw you move, like you lost, you moved. And then we also see when they're adults how they're eating, and Jennifer gives June her food, being like, it's your day to eat. Because in the book we go much more into their eating habits because they were anemic and bulimic, and they would do this thing where one of them would eat both of their meals for a stretch of time while the other one didn't eat anything, and then they would switch. And then also, like, when they were separated as adults, when they were in that institution and separated, Like they would worry, like, is June eating when she's supposed to not be eating? Or is Jennifer, is she eating the right amount? Because they were competitive, of course, and each one wanted to be skinnier than the other. And yeah, the book went much more into that. And the book made it seem like Jennifer was like the stronger twin and the leader of the two of them. And there's a passage in the book that says, there was a sort of game going on. I could see June dying to tell me things. Then something would happen. Jennifer was stopping June. She never moved. I watched and could barely detect the slightest eye movement, but I knew she was stopping June. It was strange, like extrasensory perception. She sat there with an expressionless gaze, but I felt her power. She made all the decisions. The thought entered my mind that June was possessed by her twin. And when they're in school, like when they're like the 12 to 14 age, and the teachers want to separate them and see if that helps, they ask them for their opinion and they write out their feelings. And both of them like are supportive of it. And they're like, yeah, I think it would be good if we're apart because neither wants to be the one to act first. And so if we're just not around each other, we can be more free to do what we want to do. However, once they are separated, they do not deal with it well. And so they are quickly reunited again. So can't live with each other, can't live without each other. And the older they get, the more they realize the influence they have on each other in a negative way. And there's a journal entry from June which reads, something like magic is happening. I am seeing Jennifer for the first time like she is seeing me. I think she is slow, cold, and has no respect and talks too much. But she thinks I am the same. We are both holding each other back. She does not want jealousy or envy or fear from me. She wants us to be equal. There is a murderous gleam in her eye. I'm scared of her. She's not normal. She's having a nervous breakdown. Someone is driving her insane. It is me. And in the movie, we don't really see... The movie focuses more like on the strength of their bond, whereas in the book we definitely see, like that passage shows, is just the animosity they could have towards each other at times. And it was jealousy, which the movie, whenever they get in fights, which there's like 3 different scenes where they get in a physical fight with each other, and it's like always because they're jealous. But in the book there was just like this undertone where even when things were going apparently fine, there was just this bad vibe between them, and yet there was also this love between them, right? And which, by the way, in the movie there's that part where they're walking home and then June tries to strangle Jennifer, but then she stops and she's like, I'm sorry. Whereas in the book, she had actually pushed Jennifer into the river and then she goes in after her and tries to drown her, but then she stops. They get out of the river and she apologizes saying, I don't know why I did that. But yeah, the book definitely showed that drama between them even more than the movie did. But I think, like, for one, the book was written initially when Jennifer was still alive. Whereas now, because Jennifer is dead and because it seems like she sacrificed herself for June, it just seems disrespectful and in bad taste to show her as the villain in the movie, right? Because yeah, the book definitely tried to make her seem like the villain in this relationship. And which that whole segment I read where it was like, I could see that June was possessed by her twin, and how the book definitely at times tried to make this into something creepy and something supernatural, and a lot of documentaries about them through the years have tried to do the same. And I get, like, as a sales tactic, that's a good way to draw people in, I suppose, but this isn't some fictional story. Like, these are 2 real people, and so giving it like a creepy spin like that just seems inappropriate. And I'm really glad the movie did not go that route. But yeah, the book at times tried to give it this creepy supernatural undertone. And when really they were just 2 girls who formed these coping mechanisms that ended up being unhealthy. And then it escalated into something greater. And they were just 2 people who were not healthy and needed help. Like, there wasn't anything creepy about them. They just needed help and they needed to be humanized, right? And so when they try to turn it into something creepy, that's like the opposite of what they need. And so Marjorie Wallace was obviously close to them, and yet she definitely tried to make it feel creepy at times, which initially I wasn't bothered by it, but the more I thought about it, I was like, man, like, it seems wrong to be treating these 2 human beings when you tell their story. It seems wrong to try to make it into something scary when they were just 2 girls who needed help. But yeah, the movie definitely focuses on the strength of their relationship. And even though I like that, and I'm glad they didn't make Jennifer the villain and they didn't make it anything creepy, at the same time, I do wish they would have showed how they held each other back at times though. And just that struggle they had, I feel like it could have been shown even more so. But to move on to Carl and Wayne, because in the book, when they are in school, they meet Carl and Wayne's older brother, who is an American, and they are immediately interested because they're obsessed with American culture. And then it isn't until years later that they look up their name and number and they start calling them. And then Carl and Wayne are the 2 brothers that are still living at home. And yeah, the twins, like, it was just a bad relationship all around with these brothers, both on the side of the brothers as well as the twins, because the twins do break into their home, which the movie shows. And then they also just allow themselves to be treated so poorly by these brothers, but it seems like it's just maybe they felt like that's what they deserved and they didn't know any better, that they should be being treated better. But the older brother eventually just kind of loses interest. And like I said, Carl is the one that will stick around and hang out with them. But it gets to the point where the parents are annoyed that they keep calling and they'll wait outside for hours until like the brothers will come outside. And so it gets to the point where the parents are like, this has to stop. But for the most part, the parents were pretty aloof up until things got more extreme, I guess. But to read a section of the book that talks about this family, it reads, "The stepmother was in her mid-20s, petite with oriental features inherited from her Japanese mother. She was much in love with the handsome sailor, and the price she had to pay was 4 fun-loving stepsons only a few years younger than herself. Jerry, Lance, Wayne, and Carl were all born just over a year apart. Their own mother, a Cherokee who had lived with them while they were first based in Brody in the 1970s, had committed suicide by blowing her brains out when 3 of her boys were in the house. Such a violent act had its repercussions. The boys grew up with an arrogance and indifference to society which made them careless with other people's emotions and self-centered in their own. George, the father, concentrated all his attention on his new wife, leaving the boys very much to themselves with little in the way of guidance or discipline." Which, quick side note, Marjorie Wallace, she's talking about the mother of these boys and how she committed suicide, and the way she words it is had committed suicide by blowing her brains out. That seems like a disrespectful way to talk about it. Like, yeah, anyway, that seems like a weird way to phrase it. Anyway, so yeah, in the movie we see Wayne, which is the older one, having relationships with them. But like I said, in real life, it was the younger brother, Carl, who was only like, I want to say like 15 or 16, whereas they were like 18, which isn't a huge gap, but still. He has sex with Jennifer first, and in the movie it's in a garage, whereas in the book they actually broke into a church and that's where that happened. But the movie does a good job at showing how like Jennifer imagines it being something more romantic than it really is, because you see it in her fantasy and then you see like the harsh reality of it. But they were delusional at times and would write about events as if it was something so special when it's like, that wasn't very special. And after these brothers end up moving, like I said, they hang out with these other teenagers who are even younger. Like one of them is like only 13 or 14, and they end up having sex with him as well, which is just weird and wrong. And again, they're thinking it's romantic, and it's clearly they weren't in the right state of mind, right? But like I said, from here they start to go on to like a 5-week crime spree, basically like petty theft and things. Whereas the movie makes it seem like it was more short-lived. But yeah, it went on for like over a month where they were just doing these different illegal acts, trying to get some excitement and fulfillment. And then when they were arrested and put on trial, the book reads, "Every detail of their 5-week spree of crime was framed in language which made the often trivial nature of the crimes take on heroic dimensions. I felt quite proud," said Jennifer, "to tell you the truth. I was rather enjoying it. It was a day to remember for when I'm old, me and my sweet youth." And so again, even though they didn't do anything crazy, they were given a life sentence. And it's interesting because neither book or movie takes the racial aspect or the fact that they were women into account, because I would imagine if 2 white boys were caught doing what they had done, they would not have been given such a severe sentence. But yeah, neither the book or the movie delves into that, which I watched a brief interview of Letitia Wright on Jimmy Fallon, and she said how like the twins use silence as a way to fight the racial injustice, but the movie doesn't address that at all. So maybe that's how Letitia Wright was thinking about it in her performance, but the movie does not convey that aspect in my mind. But yeah, the book and movie just don't address that aspect, which surprised me because I feel like that definitely probably played a role, right? Because they're the only Black family in the area, and they're 2 women too. So it would have been interesting to delve into how that affected how they were treated. But in the movie, they are taken to Broadmoor, the hospital, and that is where they are at the entire time. Whereas in the book, I forget the names of the hospitals, but they're in one, which isn't as nice. And they want a retrial where they will be taken to another facility, and the other facility is supposed to be nicer. And so they're wanting to be sentenced and taken to this other place. However, it keeps being postponed, and so they keep having to deal with that. But eventually it does happen and they are transferred, and they imagine this new place being like so amazing when in reality it's not. But we get that great scene in the movie where they're talking about Broadmoor and saying it has a swimming pool and this and that. And June, has this fantasy about what it will be like, which was a really beautiful scene, but then, it's juxtaposed with the reality of what it's actually like there. It is sad because in their journals, we see how like both of them like wanted to break out of this shell and they wanted to be someone different and to be themselves, but then they held themselves back and they held each other back. And so June, in her journal, she writes about wanting to go to this other hospital because she wants to get treatment and she wants to get better, but then again, she just would hold herself back at times. And once they are at this new hospital, which the movie shows this too, is how they start dating the different men who are also being held there. But this is like a prison hospital, and the men there are there for serious crimes like murder and rape. And so you have June and Jennifer who are there for such a minor offense, and yet the only people they have to associate with are these people that have done things that are so much worse. And the book about their institutionalization, it reads, June and Jennifer could never come to terms with the fact that they had been given what amounted to a life sentence for vandalism and 3 counts of arson, when other teenagers guilty of far more serious crimes, often involving bodily harm, would spend at most a few months in prison. Aubrey and Gloria Gibbons, their parents, were equally bitter. For the 12 years since the twins' arrest, they had felt their daughters had been taken from them. Like so many relatives of people with mental illness, they had been left out in the cold. They were given little information about the conditions in which their daughters lived or the drugs and other treatments administered to them. And in the book and movie, Marjorie is at one point meeting with them, and Jennifer tells her kind of mysteriously that she feels like she's going to die, and Marjorie is like, what gives you that idea? And Jennifer is like, I can just tell. But both of them, like, they would talk about this at different times. We see it in the movie, but in the book definitely they would talk about their own death at various times, so maybe Wallace didn't think it was anything out of the unusual. Whereas in the movie, it definitely seems out of the unusual when she says it. But she does die in the van on the way home, and again, it seems like she chose to die in order to release June so that June could live her own life. And in the book, there's a part where June is talking about this and it says, now that I have faced her death, it has been a sweet release. And so in the movie, we don't really see that June is grateful for Jennifer having died, but we do see her in the end living a better life, right? But in the book, we definitely got the feeling that like she was grateful for it. And she even says when she's talking to Wallace years later about when she tried to drown Jennifer, she didn't look back on it with regret. And instead she was like, I wish Jennifer had died then because I would have been able to start my life so much earlier. But it didn't happen until we were 30 that I was finally able to start living. And so again, I don't dislike that the movie didn't show that she was grateful for her death. It just showed that she was able to move on and live a better life. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of interesting in the book though that part of her was like, it's been a sweet release and I'm grateful that it happened. Which, yeah, I guess that seems harsh and that's why the movie didn't quite want to show it that way. But anyway, yeah, it really is just so tragic because they were obviously so close to each other and had such a strong bond. But at that same time, that bond is what was holding them back. And I did wonder because, at a young age, they were just very reserved. And the parents, Aubrey, the father, he seemed very he would go to work and he would spend a lot of time at his job. And then when he came home, it didn't seem like he did much interacting with the kids. And yeah, the mom was just like, oh, the twins are just shy and they just hang out with each other. That's fine. And so part of me wonders if the mom had made them interact with other kids or something at a young age, if things would have been different. However, they did spend a lot of time with their younger sister, which we don't see that in the movie, but in the book, we see that their younger sister played a part in the plays they would do with their dolls and things. And so they were very close to her up until she got older and then they stopped hanging out with her. But they would talk to her too. But the movie does show with their sister, their older sister has a baby. And this is in both book and movie where the sister goes up to them to show them her baby. And the sisters, they had originally been planning on coming downstairs. But when the sister unexpectedly shows up upstairs, the twins end up freezing. And the sister is very hurt by this because she's like, what? I'm trying to make an effort with you two and I'm showing you my baby and you can't even say anything. And so she gets very upset and she's like, that's it. I'm going to stop trying with them and I'm never seeing them again. And so that was a great scene in the book because one, you see just the strain this put on the family, but also that scene where beforehand where they're practicing on how to go downstairs and they're practicing how to tell people Merry Christmas. But then when they're confronted, when they're not ready, when it's not on their terms, they end up freezing up. And so that was just such a heartbreaking scene. And in the book, we read in June's diary about how upset she was about how that went. And she's like, man, I really wanted to hold my niece and I don't know why we couldn't say or do anything, but they just felt stuck. And the journal entries in the book, they also often talk about how much they love their parents, and yet you wouldn't know that because they don't show their love. And so that was just interesting too, where they say how much they love their mom, mom, and yet the mom doesn't feel that love because they didn't know how to show it. But in the movie, it was interesting too because the parents are there when they get the news that the twins will be released. And this has been hard on the parents, right? And yet when they get the news, the twins are just so in their own world and they're just hugging each other rather than hugging their parents too and like sharing that joy. They're just so in each other's world and their own emotions and not quite thinking about the others around them as much. And then with their diagnoses, so in the movie, we hear that they are diagnosed with psychopathic disorder, and we hear that in the book as well. And later on in the book, they are also diagnosed with schizophrenic disorder. And Marjorie Wallace disagreed with both of those, and she feels like they didn't have either one of those going on. And so she feels like they were misdiagnosed, which therefore caused them to not receive the proper treatment and the proper care that they needed. And so again, the book, that was like a big point she was trying to make, is just bringing awareness to mental health and proper diagnosing. And obviously that's a huge thing, right? Which there were parts in the journals where they did almost seem like they had some sort of antisocial personality disorder, like not aware of other people's emotions and not aware what was socially normal or not. But again, that's not necessarily a disorder. It could just be because they were so closed off from society, right? And so it was fixed once they were able to be around people. And then June, especially once she didn't have Jennifer around, she was able to, be more normal, which is normal in parentheses, right? Because what is normal anyway? But moving on to book versus movie. So while the book does give us more details, I would actually say that the movie wins because it was just so much more emotional and so beautiful. And it does, like I said, it doesn't delve into certain issues that I think would have been more interesting. It really does just focus on their bond and their relationship and their imaginations and just the ending when Jennifer ends up dying. But again, I feel like they could have shown more about how they held each other back. That should have been more present, I think. So the book does a good job at showing their codependent and their love-hate relationship, but then the book just isn't as emotional as the movie is. So ultimately, I do like the movie better. Both of them have kind of weird pacing at times, but I feel like the movie probably has better pacing than the book did. But even in the movie, we see them in the hospital for like a fair amount of time. But then we flash forward and suddenly it's been like over 10 years and they're doing better. And it's like, but we didn't see any of those the last 10 years. Like how and why are they suddenly doing better, and I say doing better, but yeah, I feel like that just could have been shown more. So neither a book or a movie is perfectly done, but yeah, I still really like the movie and I would definitely recommend it and I would watch it again. And it was just really beautiful, very poignant, very touching. And I haven't seen many other people talking about this because usually, which I'm trying to stop watching other reviews before I film mine because I want mine to be more original and not be influenced by the reviews I'm seeing other people give. However, this one I was looking for reviews and a lot of the normal movie reviewers I watch, they weren't even talking about this and they didn't have a Letterboxd review for it either. So people should definitely be watching this and talking about it. And yeah, I think it's well worth your time. And if at this point you're watching this and it's streaming, you should definitely stream it because it is definitely worth that. But anyway, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful and informative. Don't forget to like and subscribe, rank, give my podcast a rating and review, and I will see you next time. Bye.